So my dear friend and colleague Wallace lost his mother this last July, and she was really a force. His father, Dr. Wallace Hartsfield Sr., is much more well known in the community, civil rights leader, icon, pastor, preacher. The post office on Cleaver Boulevard is named for him, and when he died in January, right before COVID, there was a whole week long of memorial services. And Wallace followed his father into the ministry, pastors his father's church, but he'll tell you that his mother, Miss T, as she was called, was the person who really kind of made a space for him to kind of claim who he was. And his mother, she was a force. And more than once he's told me this story. He went to high school or school at the Loretto School. It was an experimental school kind of out south Kansas City. Wasn't going for a long time. It was white and black families, more open-minded, kind of an experiment and integration. And one day there was a scuffle between Wallace and this white boy. And a pause here, Wallace, PhD, brilliant, caring, courageous, the most soft-spoken person I know. And when the parents were called and his mother arrived, the white boy was in a room with maybe 1 or 2 teachers kind of with him, and Wallace was in a room with 7 or 8. And like Wallace said, my mother nearly shut that place down. I mean, that's who he grew up with, this woman who was a force. And his sisters, and then the black women in the church, and you know, Wallace will say, I mean, if you cross the mothers, especially the black mothers in the church, you're gone, right? So this morning, when we hear Tabitha and when we see Tabitha in the lesson, I want you to see Miss T. I want you to see this kind of strong, powerful presence. Not just this woman. The word disciple was used for Tabitha, the only place in all of the scripture where a woman is called disciple, that feminine form. So what does that mean? That means preaching and teaching and leading and healing, all the stuff the men do. And she was given to good works and acts of charity. I mean, that's a lot, right? That's feeding the hungry and welcoming the visitors. That's the young woman in trouble who comes to the house at night. And so Tabitha, Miss T, she's not just here by herself. She's with the widows. She's with this group of women, this group of powerful women, right? Think not just of the nuns, but think of those black sororities, right? Who stood with Kamala and Ketanji. And before, do you remember when President Obama nominated Loretta Lynch, the very first African-American woman to be Attorney General, and her nomination stalled for 166 days, the longest in the history of this country, and they would not take a vote until the Delta sorority, they stood at the door of McConnell's office and they stayed there until they got the vote and she was on the bench, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. This kind of sisterhood, this kind of power, this kind of women who are rising up, and yet they live and have to navigate the Roman Empire. I mean, it was a tough time. You know, very few at the top, the masses at the bottom, you know, dominating, controlling. A lot like what our country feels like right now. We're really losing ground. I mean, some of that has kind of gone by us, like we take the state houses and people don't realize we've lost ground on the diversity there. Republican state house senators and legislators are 97% white. So that's not of the people and by the people and for the people anymore. And we look at the ruling that happened this week, and I know dear people who oppose Roe, who have a seamless ethic of life, but that's not what this is about, right? This is about control. The politicians who support this, you know, these are the same politicians who voted against extending the child tax credit that expired in December, that helped in Kansas and Missouri alone 981,000 children, at least a third of whom lived in poverty, for whom that money meant coming home after school to have something to eat or not. I mean, the statistics have shown over and over and over again, that money that parents got, that extra money they got each month, they spent it on food, education, child care, and those families that got that, their expenses on alcohol and cigarettes went down, right? These politicians opposed that. They've opposed universal pre-K over and over again. They've opposed SNAP benefits and Medicaid expansion. This is about controlling women, controlling women's bodies, and controlling the poor. And there may be a few for whom, unfortunately, it's just about a ploy to get reelected. But what we sense here is the truth we know about Americans, which is Americans are fiercely independent. And in the final moment, Americans, whatever stripe they are, they want to make choices about their own body. And everybody knows abortion will go away, but access to safe, legal abortion will go away. And what we've heard, you know, that quintessential moment, 1992, those of us old enough to remember when Dan Quayle was running as the pro-life conservative, and he was asked, if your daughter got pregnant, what would you do? And what did he say? We would talk to her and counsel her, and then we would support whatever decision she makes, which is what every single other American wants, finally in the final moment. And so what you have here is this kind of place where women are trying to navigate a world in which they don't have power. And what do women do in such a world? They go to the man. And so that's exactly what the widows have to do. They have to go to this guy, Peter, and luckily, he's a good guy. He's just raised Aeneas. The author of Luke Acts likes to do this, where he kind of pairs a miracle with the woman, with the man. It kind of goes back and forth. So this Aeneas has just been raised. So the women go to Peter, and they say, well, they send the disciples to go to Peter and to ask him to come to Tabitha, who's died, to raise her. And then they show Peter two things. This is the absolute center of the story. They show him two things which are a sign of their relationship with Tabitha. They show him their tears and the tunics that she's made, the bridesmaids' dresses, right? The tears. I mean, those tears are a sign of our connection, our relationship, right? I mean, you know how it is, somebody you've lost, somebody you love, and all of a sudden it just jumps up and gets you, right? You pick up the phone to call them, and you realize, you know, Mom's been gone 6 years. Or the Royals win the World Series, right? And you think, oh my God, if only my mom, or the Chiefs win the Super Bowl and Dad had just died. I mean, and those tears, they just come, right? And they're just a sign of the love and the care and the joy. They're a sign that people in the end are all that really matter to us. The tears here, probably not just sadness and sorrow, it's probably some anger too. Anger at the injustice of Tabitha's death. In the Roman Empire, people died every day, like Nate's death on the streets, unnecessary deaths. I still remember a sermon I heard 40 years ago in seminary. A young woman, a daughter of a pastor, had always struggled with addiction, and her body was found in the Trinity River. And I remember the preacher talking about Jesus wept. Lazarus died, Jesus wept. It wasn't just sadness, it was anger. It was anger that we couldn't reach her, anger that we couldn't do more, anger at the people who gave her, anger, anger, anger. And that's also what you hear here in these women weeping, showing Peter their tears. It's not just sadness, it's anger that they have lost this sister. I think about those tears because they're what motivate us to change. You know, during the Kavanaugh hearings, all of those women who went to the White House and went to the court and went to the Capitol, not so much even about opinions, but about their own sexual assault. Do you remember thousands and thousands of women showed up there to speak out, to tell their truth? And there was that moment that went viral. Jeff Flake, senator from Arizona, kind of a John McCain Republican, independent voice, never Trumper, and he was on the fence. He was a swing vote, and that Friday morning he announced he was going to vote for Kavanaugh. And these two women, they met and they went to his office, kind of forged this immediate connection. But before they could get to his office, they saw the senator running for the elevator. Do you remember that moment? How they cornered him in the elevator? And for 5 minutes, how they pled and wept and cried? Look at us, Senator, look at us! I'm a victim of sexual assault. I mean, they thundered at their face. You can't put this guy on the bench and tell me my sexual assault matters. Look at me, look at me. I have children, you have children. I mean, they just wept and cried and were in his face. In the end, it didn't change the outcome, but it kicked open the door a little bit more, right? For more, a woman stopped by this week, a young woman. We were working on a project. We never got to it because instead she wanted to talk to me about sexual assault. An assault I had knew about, a newer assault I didn't, and she kept talking over and over about how she was gonna heal, how she was gonna put all of her time and energy in the next few years into healing. She had to pause her school, pause whatever, but she was gonna heal. And it's not just women. I think about Tom Nichols, another conservative voice, also a Republican, who resigned from the party after Kavanaugh's confirmation and declared himself an independent. He never writes about abortion. He writes about Russia, and he's been busy, right? He writes in the Atlantic, and he wrote this article this week. He said, I hate writing about abortion. Nobody's mind has ever changed, and it's just fire and fury. But he said, I have to speak up now. He learned 20 years after his mother died that she had had an illegal abortion in the late 50s that nearly killed her, and it left her with such psychological and physical scars. This woman who had a very difficult childhood, his mother never had an easy life. And he said now, I mean, you could feel the emotion on the page, the thought that some politician might make that decision for her was just too much for him to bear. So that's kind of the tears that we hear today, this kind of outpouring, this kind of things have got to be different. And then in case Peter doesn't get from these women, this is our sister Tabitha, you better save her, then they show him the tunics. They pull out these beautiful things that he has made. It's like Ellie and her sister and all the people who gathered around and said, look at these garments Maria made for us. It's like the sorority sisters in those crimson jackets showing up, a sisterhood. It's like those young women who desegregated the schools. We've talked about that so much. It was a young man who desegregated the lunch counters and the dinettes, but it was mainly young women who marched into those schools. I mean, you can picture the little girl, right? Perfect dress and the little Peter Pan collar, the little pigtails, ribbons perfect. Or the young woman walking into the high school, I mean, looking like $1 million, right? Her bag, her shoes, they all matched, perfectly pressed. None of that was happenstance, right? The families and the neighbors and everybody came together so those girls could represent themselves and represent their community. Like Betta Bowman, she was one of the 9 young women who desegregated Baton Rouge School. That was one of the worst. The day before the school started, there was an effigy of a young black man hanging in the tree. The girls had carcasses from animals, all kinds of things in their yards. And those young women, they walked into that school. Betta Bowman, she sewed all summer long to make her wardrobe. And there were some girls who didn't have the funds, and other people sewed for them. Allies came together. And when those girls walked into that school, right, they weren't alone. There was a community with them, cloaking them, creating this beautiful tapestry of support. There's so much force for good. There's Miss T, and there's Tabitha, and there's Betta, and there's Anita, and there's Christine, and there's all the women who've spoken their truth. And it's not just back there. Sometimes there's so much good news, you just miss it. Like Thursday, there was another historic announcement. I don't know, some of you may have seen that Jen Psaki was stepping down from the White House press secretary. I wasn't happy about that. I love Psaki and her radiance and her red hair and how she seems so stable and calm, and how even when the reporters who don't like her come at her, she's able to kind of take it and turn it, not like a wrestler so much trying to pin her, but more like a dancer, and you hear her response and you think, that's why I'm happy to be an American, right? On Thursday, they announced her replacement. It was a historic, maybe some of you heard it, Corinne Jean-Pierre, first African-American woman to be named the White House press secretary, and more, first openly gay person to be named the White House press secretary. And I heard that and I thought, really, Biden? I mean, do you just have to like court trouble? And then I saw her. That was the most hopeful thing I have seen since little Amanda Gorman stood up there and gave that poem at Biden's inauguration. First of all, this woman, you think, why did they choose her? And then you hear her speak and you think, this Haitian immigrant, because in a country of 330 million people, she's the most qualified. Oh my God, you have got to watch the clip of Jen Psaki passing the baton to Corinne Jean-Pierre. I've watched it 7 times yesterday. First of all, the woman, I know you're not really supposed to comment on women, but this woman, she's gorgeous. She looks like Michelle Obama and Jackie O together. She's wearing this white dress with this, I mean, her shirt, she's radiant. She's that kind of joyful, radiant, beautiful person that you don't even know. And then she starts speaking, and you're like, how can some 44, she looks like she's about 28. And then Jen Psaki, this is the part, in my entire life, I have never seen anything like this. Never, it's probably never happened. So Jen Psaki is passing the baton to her, and she asks her to come up, and then Jen Psaki starts crying. And the woman comes up there, and Jen Psaki's holding her hand. She won't let her hand down. She's like, the relationship and the joy and the pride, and it's just pouring out as this white woman passes this baton to this black gay woman. You know what? God is not finished with us yet. You know, there is so much force for goodness. And it's not just back there, right? It's the young people coming out, right? I mean, so much beauty and so much good. And we are standing over that body, and we are demanding, and we are saying, we're not going anywhere, right? Until you raise this beautiful country back up. Amen. May the God who has created us one and all, created us to love, created us to make the best choices we can in the most difficult moments, may this God gather us together, bring us all up, make of us a coalition of beautiful, engaged, committed people. Amen.
Amen.